Thanks for your company on Saturday Agenda. Well, on Thursday, the Treasurer Joe Hockey will release the long-awaited Commission of Audit that is expected to make a fairly strong case for structural changes to the budget, i.e. paring back spending, government spending. And Joe Hockey, late last week, did confirm a couple of areas where that can be done in the long term. For example, lifting the pension age to 70 and also a co-payment on GP visits. It's been reported of around $6 per visit. We'll wait and see what the detail has, but still with me, Josh Frydenberg and Andrew Leigh. Perhaps I'll start with you briefly, Andrew Leigh. I know, for example, several very wealthy retirees who are worth several $1 million who are able to access government concessional health cards and travel cards and the like. Is that the sort of area that money can be saved along with the pension age and the like?
David, there's two issues here. One is where we stand in terms of international spending on the pension. And actually, we're one of the most economical. We spend 3.5% of national income on public pensions compared to 7.8% for the typical developed country. And so, looking across the developed world, it's not a natural area where you think Australia has to slash back. But the other is that pensioners, like all other Australians, listened to the Prime Minister say the day before the election there would be no changes to pensions, no cuts to pensions. It's a solemn pledge from a man who has been crisscrossing the country for years, saying that the thing that would differentiate him from the previous government is that he would keep his promises. And now he looks like breaking them, not just with the new GP tax, but also with cuts to pensions. And I think Australians will look at that with a raised eyebrow or two.
Josh Frydenberg, do people, pensioners in particular and older Australians, have a right to be upset at the fact that, yes, Tony Abbott did very clearly say no changes to pensions, and then in the very first budget of his government, Joe Hockey looks almost certain to do exactly that, change the pension, even if it's pushed out beyond the next election? Do people have a right to be upset?
Well, we'll certainly keep our commitments to pensioners, but Joe Hockey made a very important, indeed a very good speech during the week, and he pointed out that the Commonwealth spends $40 billion a year on the pension. That's 10% of Commonwealth spending, and it's more than we spend on schools and hospitals. And the demographics are really important here. Between 2010 and 2050, David, the number of people over the age of 64 and under the age of 85 will more than double, and the number of people in Australia over the age of 85 will quadruple. So we do need to rein in this spending, and Andrew likes to talk about international comparisons. Well, the other thing that Joe Hockey pointed out in this speech was that the IMF looked at 17 advanced economies between the years 2012 and 2018 in terms of expenditure growth. And would you believe that Australia had the highest and most rapid rate of expenditure growth? More than Korea, more than Japan, more than the US, more than Canada, more than France, more than Germany. And that's a big warning sign, a flashing red light that we need to do something about expenditure.
So how will you keep your promise to pensioners then, as you said at the start of your answer there, if you do change the pension?
Well, let's just wait and see what is announced in the budget. But we do need to have this conversation, and we do need to do a deep dive into this issue, because Labor was happy just to spend willy-nilly, not worried about the more than $660 billion of debt that they were racking up, or the cumulative deficits of equaling $123 billion, or the $12 billion annual interest bill that they've saddled for every Australian. We need to do more in this area to rein in spending. The other thing that Joe Hockey pointed out, David, was about co-payments, was about means testing, was about ending corporate welfare, was about getting people into work as opposed to trapping them in long-term unemployment benefits, and was about reducing the overall government spending.
What
So
about
we need to do
paid
this.
parental leave scheme, though, Josh Frydenberg? I'll stick with you because all this talk of means testing, and Tony Burke, the Shadow Finance Minister, is right, isn't he, when he says that the PPL is the opposite of means testing because it rewards wealthier Australians with more government money for having a baby?
Well, our economy will be healthier, David, if more women are in the workforce. We're actually below countries like Canada in terms of workforce participation from women. And one of the means of doing that is through a genuine paid parental leave scheme. Now, Labor gave us a Mickey Mouse paid parental leave scheme.
That may be
They gave
true,
us
but it is the opposite of means testing, isn't it?
Well, look, it's about having a system which encourages women to stay in the workforce, and obviously it's going to help families to grow and to cater for the increased expenditure for their children. Only very few people are at that top bracket where we're talking about getting $75,000 under the PPL for 6 months of paid parental leave. It's only a very few people. The vast bulk of people will now get 26 weeks of a more generous PPL as opposed to the minimum 18 weeks at minimum wage without any superannuation.
Andrew Leigh, would you like to see the Senate amend, well clearly you would like to see the Senate amend the PPL, because if the Greens amendments are taken up, it's not going to save a whole lot of money. The Greens want it capped at $100,000 as your income, but that's not going to save the budget too much, is it?
You're perfectly right about that, David. I mean, the Greens want an unfair parental leave scheme, just as the Liberal Party wants one. But what parental leave illustrates is that this is a government which really has some pretty twisted priorities. Since coming to office, Joe Hockey has doubled the deficit, and he's done that through things like giving $9 billion to the Reserve Bank that they didn't ask for, like going soft on multinationals, losing tax revenue nearly $1 billion, and like refusing to go ahead with a Labor measure that would have imposed a slightly higher tax rate on people with superannuation balances over $2 million who get more government assistance than someone on the full rate pension. In fact, the government tax breaks to super will soon exceed the total cost of the pension.
Okay.
So this is a government that is pretty weak when it comes to standing up to the strong, but it's strong when it comes to standing up to the weak. It's a government which is putting in place a scheme that would give $75,000 to millionaire families when they have a child, but thinks that people with chronic disease should pay a new tax to go to the doctor.
Okay, I'll just wrap you up
thinks
there
the
because
pensioners
we
should be
don't have
cut.
too much longer left on the program. In fact, very short time. And I wanted to ask Josh Frydenberg about relations with Indonesia. The president, SBY, has invited Tony Abbott to a conference that's chaired by him. Are relations thawing out, and will and should Tony Abbott accept that invitation?
Well, let's just wait for an announcement from Tony Abbott on that invitation, but it is a very good sign. Relations with SBY have been extremely good over successive coalition governments. His term as president is coming up in July, and there will be a new president in Indonesia. Okay. But this is an important development, and isn't it refreshing, David? We're not talking about boats because it's been more than 4 months since we've had an authorised boat arrival. That irritant in the relationship is now gone.
Josh Frydenberg and Andrew Leigh, I'm sorry to cut you off, Andrew, but we are out of time and we will have to move on to a break and then the news. Thanks very much for joining us, and the news with Tim Webster is coming up after this.